A pleasant day to all of you, my dear students. So today we are going to discuss again another lesson. So for today's lesson, we are now on lesson number 13. Lesson number 13, as you can see, will focus on finding the zeros of the function. These zeros of the function that we are pertaining to, these are also what we call as the x-intercepts. So where can you find these x-intercepts when you graph the quadratic function, the equation of the quadratic function? These x-intercepts or zeros of the function, these are the points where the graph intersects the x-axis. The points where the graph intersects the x-axis. So we call those points as zeros of the function. So again, zeros of the function is also known as the x-intercepts. That's the reason why we have a separate lesson for this. It's because nung last time, hindi natin sinagot yung uh, finding the x-intercepts because we made mention that we are going to have to come up with a lesson regarding zeros of the functions. So here it is. Ito na ngayon yung lesson natin about the zeros of the function. So, ano ba yung kailangan nating malaman about zeros of the function, and also how are we going to find out the zeros of the function? So, just like quadratic equation, there's also a way for us to identify right away if the given equation has two roots, two real roots or two non-real roots, or no one real root. So, ganun din in zeros of the function. So, we also have there what we call mixture of zeros of the quadratic functions. So, since we are pertaining to the nature of the zeros of quadratic functions, that thing that we use on identifying the nature of the roots of a quadratic equation, that's also what we are going to use in order for us to find out the nature of zeros of quadratic functions. And that is by using d is equal to b squared minus 4ac. Do you still remember that expression or that equation? So d stands for the discriminant. So, di ba, when we find out for the discriminant of a certain quadratic equation, so we can identify there the nature of the roots of that given quadratic equation. So that's also what we are going to do here. So knowing the nature of the zeros of the quadratic functions, so we can make use also of that formula, and all you have to do is to find out for the discriminant of it. In quadratic function, we call that as zeros of the function, but in quadratic equation, we call that as roots of that quadratic equation. So, what are those nature of zeros of the quadratic functions? Unahin natin, sabi dito, if your d is greater than 0, ibig sabihin, if your discriminant is greater than 0, the f of x or your quadratic function has two real and equal zeros, and the parabola intersects the x-axis twice. So, ibig sabihin, this nature means that uh, if your discriminant, when you solve for the discriminant of a given quadratic equation, the quadratic function, so when you got a value of greater than 0, meaning to say it's a positive number, so meron siyang two real and equal zeros. So it means to say that when you graph the equation, the quadratic function using Cartesian plane, you will find out that uh, it will intersect the x-axis twice. So, ibig sabihin, kung meron kang yung graph mo na parabola, magi-intersect yun sa x-axis ng dalawang beses. So, if that is only if your discriminant is greater than 0 or a positive number. Next, here, if your discriminant or d is equal to 0, then the function has one real zero, and the parabola intersects the x-axis only once. So it's not always that uh, the equation, the quadratic function, when we graph it using Cartesian plane, mag-intersect siya always twice on the x-axis. So depending on the given equation. So you can find out that easily if you are going to find for the nature of it by getting the discriminant. So if you find out that the discriminant is equal to 0, then it has one real 0. And when you graph it, or on a Cartesian plane, the parabola intersects only the x-axis once. So once lang siya. So it's either dun lang nakapoint sa x-axis or sa kabila, basta isang beses lang siya mag-intersect on the x-axis. Last, sabi dito, if d is less than 0, or meaning to say if your discriminant is a negative number, then the function has two imaginary zeros. And the parabola does not intersect the x-axis. Ano ibig sabihin nun? Ibig sabihin, the roots or the zeros of the function of that given equation of the quadratic function are imaginary numbers or tinatawag nating non-real numbers. So, that is only if your discriminant is a negative number. Then when we are going, if we are going to graph that equation of the quadratic function using Cartesian plane, then we'll find out that the parabola will not intersect the x-axis. So paano ba hindi mag-intersect? Ibig sabihin, nakaangat yon sa x-axis, yung given graph of the quadratic function. So that is only if your discriminant is less than 0. So with the help of finding the discriminant, also, right away, we can find out how many zeros a given quadratic function has, whether it has two real and equal zeros, it has one real zero, or it has two imaginary zeros or non-real zeros. So first, we can make use of the nature of zeros of the quadratic functions. But in order for us to find out the zeros of the function, which is our topic for today, or finding out for the zeros of the function, all we have to do is to apply certain steps. So these steps that we are going to apply today, still we are going to hide it through an acronym or through a word na tatawagin nating hiya. Bakit nga ba hiya? I guess that word na hiya ay yun yung kailangang matanggal natin sa sarili natin. But not totally. I'm not saying na totally tanggalin mo siya sa sarili mo. So you just have to gain more self-confidence in you na still meron pa rin dapat hiya sa sarili mo. Kasi, but, kasi yung hiya na yan, walang maitutulong sa'yo yan in the future. Kasi, for example, when you already graduated in studying, so, when you are going to look for work, so if you are nahihiya na tinatawag, so walang mangyayari, nothing happens to you. So, the reason why you are studying is for you to develop self-confidence. So, ibig sabihin, kung nakagraduate ka hanggang college na puno ka pa rin ng hiya sa katawan, ibig sabihin, hindi mo na-develop yan nung nag-aaral ka. That's one purpose kung bakit ka nag-aaral, for you to develop self-confidence. Kaya nga yung iba, di ba, for you in order nag-aaral ka for you to gain more friends so that those friends of yours will help you to gain self-confidence. Nag-aaral ka para ma-experience mo yung mga bagay na pwede mong maranasan when you are out of your houses. So, dapat dun pa lang dinidevelop mo na. Kaya nga, di ba yung iba sumasali sa mga different sports, sumasali sa mga pageants, yung iba. So because that's one way for them to develop their self-confidence. Yung mawala yung sobrang hiya nila sa sarili. So dapat ma-overcome natin yung hiya na yon because that will help us uh, uh, that will help us grow in the future. Kasi magagamit natin yun, na-gain natin yun na self-confidence kapag we are already finding for a job that will uh, give us everything that we want. So of course, when you gain self-confidence, hindi naman yung dapat masyadong sobra. So dapat just enough self-confidence. Enough self-confidence, pwede na yun. Kasi yung pag masyadong sobra yung self-confidence mo, and the thing is that ang mayabang na tingnan, di ba? Because they are overconfident. So nasobrahan sa confidence, so nagiging tendency ang dating sa iba ay nagiging mayabang. Just gain enough self-confidence. Yung enough for you to do things na kailangan mong gawin for you to grow as a person. And of course, sabi natin kanina, hindi dapat lahat ng hiya sa sarili natin ay tanggalin natin. Kasi may mga pagkakataon na kailangan din nating mahiya. Let's take for example, you are going to attend a birthday. You are invited on a birthday party. And you invited your friend and which is not invited by that person na nag-invite sa'yo. So, ang tendency is that that friend of yours is invited by the invited. So, magiging ganun yung kalalabasan. So, if that is the case, so kailangan, ano pa natin, alam dapat natin yung natin. So, you have to tell that person who invited you na right away, may isasama ka. So, if that person only invited you, so ikaw lang dapat yung pumunta doon. So, ibig sabihin, nandoon pa rin yung hiya sa sarili mo na kailangan once you are the only one who is invited by that person, so ikaw lang pumunta, hindi mo na kailangan magsama. Unless that person asked you to come with someone, to go with someone. So, if that is the case, then pwede yun. There's other example is that may mga pagkakataon tayo na kailangan natin ng hiya din sa sarili natin. Yung for example, yung oras ng kainan, di ba? So, hindi natin kailangan ipakita minsan yung totoong tayo para ipakita rin sa iba that we are that pinapakita rin natin na nahihiya din tayo. So, in that way, nakakasabay tayo kung ano yung kalakaran sa iba na sometimes na kailangan din nating mahiya para malaman nila that hindi tayo yung tao na super na overconfident. So na dapat malaman din ng iba na hindi tayo yung taong sumusobra, hindi tayo yung taong matatawag ano yung exact word, hindi tayo yung taong masasabing abusado. Hindi tayo matatawag na abusado. Yun yung tamang word na iniisip natin. So that means kailangan pa rin natin magkaroon ng konting hiya sa sarili natin. So para hindi masabing abusado tayo dun sa mga bagay na ginagawa at mga gagawin pa natin. So, again, as I was saying, yung hiya na yan, most part of it sa iyong katawan ay kailangan mong tanggalin, then magtira ka ng kaunti na magagamit mo rin sa mga ilang circumstances sa buhay. So, again, you are studying for you to develop your self-confidence. So, have enough self-confidence na magagamit mo rin in the future when you are already applying for a certain job that you want. So, that's the message of the steps that we call hiya. So ano ba ihiyaan natin na steps in order for us to find for the zeros of the function? So unahin natin yung HI. HI stands for have it transformed first as quadratic equation by equating it to 0. So that equation of the quadratic function, before we find for its zeros of the function, we have to transform it first into a quadratic equation by equating it again into 0. Then if it's already a quadratic equation, y will follow. Y stands for you choose any of the methods in solving quadratic equation. So babalik pa din tayo on the things that we have discussed about solving quadratic equation. So all the things that we have mentioned there are all the things, the methods that we have discussed there. So pwede natin gamitin. So we are just going to choose or the best method that we can use to solve a given quadratic equation. Then last, A stands for apply the method until you find the solution or the values of the variable. Diba, when we are asked to solve for a given quadratic equation, ang always na kailangan nating gawin is for us to find out for the values of the variable. So if we have already find out for the values of the variable, that means we have already solved the given quadratic equation. So, same thing na ginagawa natin in solving quadratic equation, yun din mismo yung gagawin natin for us to find out for the zeros of the function. Kasi yung zeros na yan, in quadratic equation, those are the roots of the quadratic equation. So since we are in quadratic function, so we call that as zeros of the function. So pwedeng ang spelling ng zeros natin ay S lang yung nasa dulo or ES. Zeros or zeros of the function. So these are the steps that we are going to apply in order for us to find for the zeros of the function or the values of the variable x that when we graph a quadratic function, those are the points that will intersect the x-axis. So again, every time you are going to think of the word hiya, that means you are thinking of the things or you are thinking of finding on how are you going to find for the zeros of the function. Now let's apply it through examples. Let's have here example number 1. So the given is y is equal to x squared minus 6x plus 8. We made mention that what we are going to do according to the first step is that to transform it into an equation. So in place of y there, we are going to replace it by 0, then arrange it in the general form of the quadratic equation. So we come up with x squared minus 6x plus 8 is equal to 0. Then that left side of the equation is a trinomial. So let's find out we can on what method to use in order for us to solve that trinomial on the left side or that given equation of the quadratic, that given quadratic equation rather. So that quadratic equation can be solved by factoring. So we are going to make use of factoring there. That means we're going to find out factors of 8 that when added, the sum is negative 6. So ang mga possible factors of 8 are 4 times 2. And 4 times 2 when added, the sum is 6. So since negative yung middle term natin, that means those two factors are negative. So that's why we come up with the factors as x minus 4 times x minus 2 equal to 0. Again, x, that first terms, that's the factors of x squared, is x times x. Then second terms of its factors, those are factors of 8 that when added, the sum is negative 6. That would be negative 4 and negative 2. That's why it's minus 4 and minus 2, then equal to 0. Then with the application of the zero product property, come up with x minus 4 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equal to 0. So solve for the values of x, we come up with x is equal to 4 and x is equal to 2. So meaning to say, that given quadratic function, equation of the quadratic function, if we are going to graph it using a Cartesian plane, that means the parabola will intersect the x-axis twice. That is on point 4 and 2 on the x-axis. So all you have to do is to look for 4 and 2 on the x-axis. Then you already have uh, a point or 2 points wherein the parabola it will intersect. So ibig sabihin, this equation of the quadratic function, katulad sinabi natin kanina, pag i-graph natin yan, mag-i-intersect yan on these 2 points on the x-axis. So yun yung gamit of the zeros of the function. So that is just for us to identify to what points on the x-axis magi-intersect yung graph of the quadratic function na tinatawag nating parabola. So that's how we answer example number 1. Let's try another example. Let's this time example number 2. So the given is y is equal to negative x squared minus 7x plus 18. So this time your a is negative. Di ba when we are solving quadratic equation, sabi natin, para mas madali nating masolve yung quadratic equation, we are going to make that a positive. So what we're going to do here, kapag inequate natin into 0 to come up with a quadratic equation, let's make this numerical coefficient of the quadratic term positive. That is by multiplying both sides of the equation by negative 1. So if you're going to do that, all the terms will change its sign. So magiging x squared now is this. Then from negative 7x magiging plus 7x. From plus 18 magiging minus 18 equal to 0. So mas madali if your a is positive, so that we come up now with this quadratic equation, and we are now again going to solve that quadratic equation using any method. And let's solve it again by factoring, because that trinomial on the left side can be factored. So let's find out factors of 18 here. That when subtracted, that when added, the sum is 7. So ano ba mga possible factors of 18? So alam natin na 6 times 3. But 6 times 3 when added is 9. Ano tayong 9 times 2? 9 times 2 when added is 11. But when subtracted, that is 7. Because, bakit natin naisip yung subtracted? Because your product is a negative number. So that means when you add a negative by a positive, you are going to subtract them. So if their answer is 7, then that would be the right factors that we are looking for. And that factors are 9 and 2. So since negative yun, ibig sabihin isa sa 9 and 2 ay negative. So alin doon yung negative? So tignan mo ngayon yung middle operation. The middle operation is plus. Ibig sabihin positive yung mas malaking number. Ano yung mas malaking number? Yun yung 9. So positive yung 9, negative na yun yung 2. So the factors are factors ng x squared, that would be x times x. Then plus 9 for positive 9 and minus 2 for negative 2 equal to 0. And using zero product property, we have x plus 9 equal to 0 and x minus 2 equal to 0. Then solve for x. We have x is equal to negative 9 and x is equal to 2. Again, since dalawa yung nakuha natin values of the variable x, that means when we are going to graph this given equation of the quadratic function, mag-i-intersect yung parabola niya dun sa point negative 9 and positive 2 on the x-axis. So nakuha ba yung example number 2? So that's how we answer example number 2. Let's try the next example. Let's have example number 3 here. So example number 3, the given is y is equal to 5x squared plus 12x minus 9. Again, using our step, or una, we have to transform it into an equation. So that would be equal to 0. Then let's make use again of any method in solving quadratic equation. Then we are going to use factoring again using AC method. So we are going to multiply 5 and 9 here. So 5 times 9 is negative 45. So we are going to find out factors of 45. Disregard muna natin yung sign, ha? So since we know that it's negative, so factors of 45 that when subtracted, uh, the result is 12. Ano ba factors ng 45? We do have 9 times 5. 9 times 5 when added, 13 when subtracted is 4. Kaya sa alang-alang natin. At other factors of 45, that is 15 times 3. When added, that would be 18. When subtracted, that would be 12. So, meron tayong idea. So, since negative yung 45, so that means we are subtracting it. So, when we subtract 15 and 3, that would be 12. But still, malalaman natin, since negative, isa doon sa dalawa ay negative. So, since positive again yung middle term, ibig sabihin, positive yung mas mataas na number. So, ibig sabihin, positive yung 15, negative yung 3. So, that will form its factor. So, nakuha yung 5x na yon. Yung 5x na yun, nakuha natin on the numerical coefficient of quadratic term together with the variable as the first terms of its factors. Then positive 15 as the factors of 45, negative 45 to be that when added, the sum is 12. Positive 15 and negative 3, kaya minus 3 dito equal to 0. Then, magiging ganito, since 5x plus 15 can still be simplified because 5 and 15 are still both divisible by 5. So we are going to simplify it by dividing both terms by 5. So magiging x plus 3. Then simply copy 5x minus 3 is equal to 0. Then with the application of the zero product property, we do have x plus 3 equal to 0 and 5x minus 3 equal to 0. Then solve for x, you come up with x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 3 over 5. And again, just like the first two examples, since we do have here two values of x, that means when we graph this equation, the quadratic function using a Cartesian plane, the parabola will intersect at points negative 3 and 3 over 5 on the x-axis. Did you get example number 3? Okay, let's answer now example number 4. So example number 4, the given is y is equal to negative 4x squared plus 6x plus 4. So just like what we did on the first three examples, the first thing we're going to do is to transform it into an equation by replacing this y to 0. So when we replace it by 0, let's arrange it already in the general form of the quadratic equation. And since your a is negative, just like what we did on example number 2, what we're going to do is to make it, we're going to make it positive by multiplying both sides of the equation by negative 1. Because again, it's easier to solve a quadratic equation when your a is equal to, when your a is positive rather. So what we're going to do, arrange it in general form the quadratic equation. So since your a is negative, to make it positive, we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by negative 1. So it will become, from negative 4x squared, magiging 4x squared now. From plus 6x, that will be minus 6x. Then from plus 4, magiging minus 4 equal to 0. Then, we're going to solve that equation of quadratic equation using, again, factoring. So, using, again, AC method. So, let's find out product of 4a and c. So, 4 times 4, that would be 16. So, we are here going to find the factors of 16. Basically, that's negative 16. Factors of 16 that when added, the sum is negative 6. Ano mga factors ng 16? That would be 8 times 2. 8 times 2 is 16. So, 8 plus 2 is 10. 8 minus 2 is 6. So, ayun na yun. So, that means, isa doon sa dalawang yun ay negative because negative 16 yun. So, ibig sabihin, since negative yung gitna, negative yung mas mataas. So, ibig sabihin, negative yung 8, positive yung 2. So, let's find out now its factors. First terms of its factors are 4x That's the numerical coefficient of the quadratic term and the variable being used there, 4x and 4x. Then the right factors of negative 16 that when added the sum is negative 6 is negative 8 kaya minus 8 and positive 2 kaya plus 2. Then both factors can still be simplified. So pag simplify natin yung both factors na yan, on the first factors, binomial factors, 4 and 8, both terms are divisible by 4. So when simplified, it will be x minus 2. On the other side, on the other binomial factors, both terms are divisible by 2. So simplifying it, natin 2x plus 1. Then using zero product property, we come up with x minus 2 is equal to 0 and 2x plus 1 equal to 0. And solve for the value of x, we come up with x is equal to 2 and x is equal to negative 1 half. That is when we simplify, when we come up with the value of x of this. So we'll come up with x which is equal to negative 1 half. So we find out two values for x. So that means if we are going to graph this equation of the quadratic function, so the parabola will intersect the x-axis twice. That is at points 2, positive 2, and point negative 1 half. So since negative yung A natin, the parabola opens downward. So ganun yung graph niya, downward, na magi-intersect on the points 2 and negative 1 half on the x-axis. So that's how we answer example number 4. Let's try another example. Let's have here example number 5. Example number 5, the given here again is y is equal to 7x squared plus 16x plus 4. So just like what we did, the first thing we're going to do is to transform it into equation, then arrange it in general form. So we have 7x squared plus 16x plus 4 equal to 0. So similar to example number 3 and 4, examples 3 and 4, so we're going to solve it by factoring again using AC method. So find out factors of 7 and 4, that would be 28. 7 times 4 is 28. So let's find out factors of 28 that when added, the sum is 16. Ano ba mga factors ng 28? 7 times 4 lang, that's 28. What else? 14 times 2. 14 plus 2 is 16. So 14 times 2 is the correct factors for 28. So that's why, since wala nang problem, walang negative sa kanila, so ibig sabihin, both factors are positive. So let's find out now its factors, 7x as the first terms of its factors, because it's 7 numerical coefficient together with the variable. And positive 14 and positive 2, that's why it's plus 14 and plus 2 equal to 0. Equate both factors to, no, not yet, because we are still going to simplify 7x plus 14 here, because both 7 and 14 are divisible by 7. It will come up with x plus 2 times the quantity 7x plus 2. Then applying zero product property, come up with x plus 2 equal to 0 and 7x plus 2 equal to 0. Then solve for the values of the variable. We have x is equal to negative 2 and x is equal to negative 2 over 7. So meaning to say, if you are going to graph this equation, the quadratic function, the parabola will intersect the x-axis at points negative 2 and negative 2 over 7. So since positive yung A natin, yung parabola naman natin opens upward. Upward that will intersect at points negative 2 and negative 2 over 7 on the x-axis. So that's how we answer example number 5. Hopefully, yung 5 examples na yon nakatulong sa atin para makuha natin yung tinatawag nating zeros of the function. So hopefully may natutunan kayong sa araw na ito. So hanggang sa muli, goodbye!